Hello, my name's Charlie. Thank you, Heidi. So I have 20 minutes or so to try and bring you back on schedule, just to talk a little bit about my story. I was talking with Andrew in the impromptu networking earlier about what do I want to get from today, and what I want to get from today is inspiration. So I feel a little bit of a fraud standing up here and talking to you. So my intention with this is really to give you an example of a story, a personal story. I guess you all have your own personal stories, and you're all here to get inspiration and to think about how you can further yours. I only offer mine as an example of one of many in the room. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. The speech was entitled "Bringing Humanity Back into Leadership." That is the purpose of the company I formed about 3 years ago. But I want to talk about how that came about and a little bit about what we're learning along the way. So my background is I was in GE for 11 years. And in fact, before that, I was in the army. I'm going to perch it this way. I'm going to break the table. I was in the army.
So be careful.
Sorry?
It has wheels, so.
Well, that'll liven the mood a little bit. If I get boring, I'll just slip off, and if I put myself to sleep. So I was in the army initially, career soldier, left the army. In fact, Jack Welch sort of was handed my CV at one point in an analyst brief, and I sort of landed rather by accident in GE about 15 years ago. And I was very much the corporate soldier, wanting to make a name for myself, wanting to get ahead. My ambition was to lead a business. So I'd left the army. I thought I wanted to be a general. Now I want to lead a business. And over the course of 11 years, I eventually did get to lead a business. So I led a business in Central Europe, one of their consumer finance businesses. And I thought I'd arrived. I was in my late 30s, leading a business, a fairly sizable business. And I thought that was it. I'd arrived where I wanted to go. And increasingly, things started not to add up as I thought that they should. I thought I should be feeling a certain way and things should have worked in a certain way once I'd arrived at this point, and they didn't seem to be. And I had two fundamental insights. I had an observation and an insight. The observation was the results, the outcomes that the organisation got was by far and away the most influenced by how the individual people reacted and interacted with each other, how information flowed around the business, how people cooperated, how decisions were made in the business. And yet, the leadership team, of which I was on, spent all its time talking about other things. Talked about organisation structure, systems, finances, results, money. And it struck me as a profound gap that the business was led mechanically but operated humanly. And I couldn't square it at all. And if GE operated that way, and it's known as a business that largely focuses on leadership and it's a real academy business, then other businesses are going to suffer from the same thing. And I thought, wow, that's a really big gap and potentially a really big opportunity. I tried to make some changes internally with some limited success, but the emphasis being on limited, not success. But I had one other much more personal insight, which led me down this path, and I guess has me sat in front of you, is that I realised that you don't change behaviours by telling people to behave differently. And you don't even change your behaviour if you have an intention to change. And I'd say this story a lot, but like most businesses, GE had a very rigorous annual appraisal process. And a penny dropped one year, I don't remember which year it was, but the same development needs showed up every year. And it never really occurred to me to question the fact that I'd go out of every annual appraisal going, right, got to be more collaborative, invest more in the relationship with my peers and compete less for resources. Absolutely, more collaborative, go away. And I'd go away and behave exactly the same way I always behaved. And which was not necessarily those things. And a penny dropped over a period of time. That was, well, hang on a second, I know I need to behave differently. I want my career to progress, but I don't have access to personal change. So what is it? I mean, I hear Heidi talking about the things that she's personally doing. You come away, I wrote down, be kind, eat mindfully. But that doesn't necessarily result in any change in my behaviour at all, even if I'm really positively inspired by it. So where does it sit? And so those two insights, the fact that businesses are run mechanically yet operate humanly, and you don't change behaviours by telling people or even believing that you should change, led me down this path. So I quit corporate life, and entered into this area, and it's, you can call it all sorts of different things, but essentially changing people's behaviours in organisations, with a view of bringing that humanity to the surface. And I don't think of it as an alternative. If businesses are led mechanically and the human aspect is very low on the horizon, it's not a question of reversing that. It's not right and wrong. It's about equaling it, bringing those two conversations to bear. What's really interesting is it's very hard to get people to hear about something which they're not particularly familiar with. They don't. It's very hard to see. It's very hard to see something you don't already see unless it's right in front of your face. And it's going to sting you if you're not careful. See, I hadn't organised that actually. I'm not that good. So it led me to change direction, and it came up with 4 fundamental principles. So how do you get organisations to change? And I'm just going to pepper this with personal insights and a little bit where the thinking is at the moment. And the 4 principles, and I offer these as just as sort of what I understand so far, is if you want to change an organisation's behaviour, it has to start from the top. I loved the trophic cascade we saw at the start with the walls and the rivers. I've read that phrase has stuck in my head, trophic cascade. And the introductory sentence was, by changing the top of the food chain, you create changes all the way through the ecosystem. Yes, of course. Change starts from the top. And that's a very, very strong parallel for me, is that you have to change the ecosystem starting from the top. So change starts from the top. It's profoundly important, because those people at the top of organisations tend to be the most successful, the most protected, and the most validated people. They're paid huge amounts of money. They have lots of people telling them how funny and how successful they are. It's very hard to change people who get all that validation. The second insight, which goes back to my point around you don't change behaviours by telling people to behave differently. You have to give them an insight. There has to be a raising of awareness so that people see what they don't already see. It was Einstein's famous quote, which is, you don't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that created it. So you have to ultimately elevate the level of consciousness. There has to be a person inside. That is not something you can teach. You can only open an opportunity to learn. The third one is, if you want to change behaviour, it has to take time. I was a victim of numerous offsites and events in my corporate life, and I have a deep-seated cynicism about offsites. They don't work on their own. And on their own is the important thing. You go away, you might, on a good offsite, you might have a good experience, you might have a successful experience, but it's very hard then to translate it back into your normal working life, because the context around you hasn't changed, often the people around you haven't changed, and in reality, the way you reference that environment hasn't changed at all. So it has to be a period of time, and how we work with organisations is we go in right from the start saying this is a period of time, typically a year. We work with leadership teams for about a year. And actually what happens is that we stay working with them for 2, 3, 4 years, because they realise that you're never done. Thirdly, am I on 3? No, that's fourthly, you have to change the external context of a business. And this really interests me, how the external context can govern our behaviour. I see tipping points on the reading list, and the great example from Tipping Point is how they cleaned up the behaviour on the New York subway by cleaning up the environment. And the principle was, if the environment is like a sewer, you'll behave like a rat. And so there's violence, crime, fare skipping. But if you clean up the environment, people clean up their behaviour. And that works in corporate life as well. And I've seen time and time again, organisations that have gone, right, well, if you want to be more collaborative, you have to go to an open plan office. If we want people to mix it up, we want to give people hot desks. It really matters. So you have to also change the institutional practices of the business. So performance appraisals, how people are hired, the organisation diagrams, everything must change. And if it doesn't, the external context acts as a huge elastic band stuck on the organisation's back, putting you back into the old way of working. Does anybody here work for Barclays? You have? No,
I
used to work for Barclays. I had a fascinating conversation right at the time when Anthony Jenkins was coming and saying, right, we're going to change the culture, with their group head of talent. And he said, well, he was very proudly showing me the new bonus scheme. Saying, look, it's really cool. We've got performance against values here. Oh, that's very good. Okay, great. Well, how are you going to use that to allocate the bonuses? It's really, really good now, because we evaluate people by both the money they make, the performance they have in the role, and the how much they reflect the values. And so that's great. So when you have high performance and high values, they get the maximum bonus. Makes sense. If they have low performance but high values, they get another chance. They actually get some money because they're demonstrating the sort of behaviours that we want them to demonstrate. So, what about this corner here, where they actually perform, they bring in money, but they don't demonstrate the values. So, well, they get a bonus too. And in that moment, you know that the institutional practice haven't been aligned, and it means absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. However high you make the letters in the reception. Has anybody been to Barclays reception?
Oh, yes.
The letters are about 6 foot high. Integrity, teamwork, respect. However high you make those letters, it makes no difference unless you align with institutional practices. So that's what I found, and that actually governs everything. And I found all of those things need to be in place in order to create change, sustainable change. And so that's all very much the model now that we're following. Coinciding with this has been the emergence of purpose. And it has different words and different names that's been given, and I think everybody here in some way will relate in their own way to it if you're here on a Saturday morning. But Simon Sinek's TED Talk and his book around the why, what, and the how it's been very widely viewed and very widely talked about. People are starting to tune into the why. Some people call it a central idea. And what's fascinating with the financial crisis, and in fact prior to the financial crisis, in the UK, the MP's expense scandals, phone hacking, NHS and Mid-Staff's NHS Trust, there's just been, almost every week, there's been a culture scandal. In other words, the problem with the NHS in Staffordshire is they don't have a culture of compassion. The problem with banks is there's not a culture of respect and ethical behaviour. The culture culture now has become lingua franca. 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. It was mostly about we're going to regulate, we're going to be able to fix it by regulation. And it wasn't really given much airtime at all. So it's become very much the lingua franca. In fact, I had a meeting yesterday, on Thursday, with the chief exec of one of our clients, and he was saying, well, so he's being coached by Ram Charan. He's very excited about it, but he doesn't really understand the guy. And he's saying, Ram keeps on talking about a central idea. Charlie, what's a central idea? So I said, well, you want to think about it as purpose. And they actually have a purpose. He goes, oh, okay, I get that. And you want to think about Southwest Airlines, and I gave him a few examples. He goes, no, I understand that. More and more organisations are tapping into a central idea to align people, which isn't a rational thing, it's an emotional thing. Southwest Airlines talks about democratising the skies. It's one of the most famous ones, it's a completely new model. EasyJet was based on Southwest Airlines. And it was a new model of we want to make travelling by air accessible to everybody, democratising the skies. And everybody's inspired by it. It taps into a positive emotion. Hello? So if you bring all these together, it's left with 3 fundamental challenges, I think. It's how do you help leaders see what they don't currently see? How do you integrate the hard and the soft? The soft, and this is a classic, right? We were, in fact, Dunia and I were with the senior team last week, and one of the leaders in the room said, we were sort of checking in and saying, how are you feeling? He goes, well, it's a bit new this, spending 2 days out of the business and working on non-work stuff. And therein lies the challenge, which is how do you help people see that understanding your motivations, drives, beliefs, behaviours, ultimately is a core part of how you do business. And how do you shift that? The big challenge is not in this room. The big challenge is how do you help people who don't see that, see it? And that's the big challenge. We talked about it before. And the third one is how are you able to create a space with those leaders where they're willing to actually listen to you to say these things? So those are the challenges we had. There are lots of so whats behind it. I want to land on just a small number, and I say that because I don't have my notes and I won't be able to remember all 7. I'm going to find it immediately on the copy. There it is. It's here somewhere. The first and foremost is exactly what Heidi was talking about. You have to be the change. You cannot teach the change. And it's an age-old cliche. However, it is fundamentally true. We have found that the only way to create a change is for us to embody it. You don't have to be, in fact, there is no destination. But you don't have to think, I am fully formed in order to create it. You just have to be one step ahead of the person you're speaking to. And I liken it in a mountain analogy. I liken it to not being a teacher, but being a mountain guide. If any of you have been up in the mountains with a guide, they are taking you and they are giving you an experience. You're trusting in them because they've been there before. And usually they take you on the route that they know. And that what we have found is a very good analogy to how we work with leaders, is you act as a mountain guide. Because you've been there before, you haven't necessarily climbed Everest, but you've been along this track before, and it's very reassuring and inspiring for them. Secondly, this point around being a native. When I left corporate life, I made a sort of promise to myself. I wouldn't do what I saw a lot of my friends do, which is get an Apple Mac, wear blue suede shoes, and never wear a tie again. You know why? Because I'm free. And I think in many cases, particularly if you want to have an effect on corporate life, that's a mistake. Because you walk in the room and they've written you off already. I'll listen to you. We might have him in as a guest speaker at an offsite because he's going to jazz us up and give us a different point of view, but they're not going to listen to you fundamentally. So we are very careful to be corporate natives. So we have PCs, we wear suits, we all have business experience, because you actually see the business and the client as, okay, you're one of us, I can listen to you. Because you have to ultimately put it in a language that they understand. And so we talk a lot about, in fact, if any of you see the logo that we have, or sort of quite heavily branded, we have a sort of linked O. Some people think it's the infinity sign. The main reason we talk about it is we bring the worlds of results together with the world of people and behaviour and culture. And typically they don't mix. They don't mix in organisations, and they don't mix in the sort of world of help for organisations. Now, HR consultancies and do good offsites, but they typically consult to HR. They tend not to relate well to the results world of the CEO. And you have the Bains, the BCGs, the PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Deloittes who work really well with the CEO and understand the results, but they don't understand how to shift people's behaviour. And those two worlds typically don't meet. And if you can create something where those two worlds meet, where you're a native, but you understand how to shift behaviours and align culture, there's magic in that. So that's what the linked O's is. And it provides permission to be listened to and credibility, but ultimately operate in the CEO's world, not the HR director's world. It's fundamentally important. We have our ambition to be the McKinsey of culture shaping, and there's lots in that, but ultimately it's to have the access and the credibility to the CEO suite, not necessarily be put into the training buckets. It's fundamentally important. There are lots of questions and challenges still in front of us. I want to just finish, and I'm happy to take. I'm going to cut it slightly short, so if you want to ask any questions or flow through into coffee. But I want to just reflect a little bit on the sort of personal insights that I've had on this journey, because it's fundamental to how you live it. I was at my parents' 50th wedding anniversary yesterday. It was a lunch party, fascinating. 50 years when married, amazing. A couple of things resonated. The sharing economy. I had an insight when you were talking, Heidi, about the sharing economy. We typically talk about collaborative consumption as collaborative consumption, how we consume. So I use Zipcar a lot, and all those sort of Airbnb and an Uber, all that's great, but that's consuming. What struck me about your talk was actually we're not very collaborative with our possessions. And there's maybe something else, there's collaborative ownership. Offering. Something very powerful in that, and I relate it back to yesterday's party because, and it was 50-year anniversary. So my uncle, my mother's brother, gave a speech. He was talking about, he was 17 at the time that they got married, in 21st of August 1965, 50 years ago. And he said, one thing that made a profound effect on me was my father, so getting married to my mother at the time, his sister, lent, now he was in the army at the time, he actually had a polo pony, he used to play polo. And he lent his horse to this 18-year-old, 17-year-old kid for a summer. And it had a profound effect on his life. He ended up running national polo associations to give people access to playing, pony club, all that stuff. So it completely shaped his life. And that one moment of lending something, now not all of you will have a polo pony, but the point is the effect. 50 years later, he was still talking about it. 50 years later. Astonishing. And so there's something in this how you deal with your possessions, not only how you consume. And I was thinking about, well, in 50 years' time, where will I be, and what will I tell my children? And what the advice I give my children is travel light. travel light, not just from a physical possessions, but from an emotional point of view. So the biggest challenge for me, with all of this change, and still with the work that we do, and building the business, is letting go of stuff, letting go of emotional stuff, not physical possessions. But the ability to travel light, the easier it feels on a day-to-day basis, the more you can get done, the more available you are to someone, the more you can listen to somebody, and the more they're going to be able to listen to you. If you go in with all the baggage of what you need to prove to them, the knowledge you have, how right you are, anything that it may be, you're not travelling light. You've got all that baggage, and you typically, and I have this mental image, around airports when you see people pulling multiple suitcases around on 4 wheels, and they're sort of pulling them around and it knocks against things. I imagine some people come into the room like that. And yet other people come in, and these are the really successful ones, both personally and professionally, are the ones who seem like they're just pulling along a half-packed carry-on bag. They skip it. And some of the most successful leaders I work with just seem as though they're not trying very hard. And it's not because they're super clever. I believe it's because they've learned to travel light. They don't hang on to stuff. They let go of stuff, and they only focus on what's important. I spend all my time focusing on stuff that isn't important. Not all my time, but too much of my time. So travel light. The other one, and this is very relevant for this group, is, and I'm very guilty of it, it's very easy to get frustrated with what is yet to be done. And in fact, it's always more to be done than has been done. I keep a gratitude journal because it reminds me of what actually has been done and what I can be grateful for. It's so easy to focus and get frustrated and get downhearted about what is yet to be done. You never know the effect you have on people. Wendy and I were having a fascinating talk just before the session started about it's extraordinary the effect people have had on our lives years ago that we still talk about. Even that lending a horse 50 years ago. You never know the effect. I do quite a lot of mentoring for sixth formers about career advice and how to show up in the workplace and go from school to the workplace. And I'm astonished at what they take away from the sessions and what they tell me years later. Charlie, what you said then was really had an important effect on me. I had no idea. So you never know the effect you're having. So don't obsess on what's left to be done. It's actually, there's an awful lot happening that you can't see and you'll never see. Final 2 points, very briefly. In fact, 3 points. One's just jumped into my head, which is very important. Piece of advice I've received that have been so well honed for me. To inspire, you must first be inspired. And it goes back to that point around being the change. And Heidi's first point was wonderful. No one cares how much you know until they know you care. I was told this at the point when I left GE Life and was going into consultancy, and I was very impressed with how much I knew. And no one else seemed that impressed with it. And I couldn't understand. Don't they see how clever I'm being about this? Until I realised that actually there was no care in it at all. And you can often get wrapped up intellectually in what you know without realising that actually people need to feel that you care before they're willing to listen to you. So care, you led with it. Care is fundamental. Unless people feel that you care, they're just not going to care about what you know. And lastly, in fact, no, I think that covers it. It's about creating a space for others. So I'll talk there. I could talk for a lot longer, especially if I had my notes. But I think that's probably about it. I want to just tell a little bit of a story. I am genuinely at the early stage of what I think is a very exciting story. We're building a business which is a sort of infiltration of big corporate life, bringing a different language but in plain clothes to organisations, and it's inspiring and fascinating what happens when we get in and we start working with leadership teams, because it's not just the individuals we affect, but it's the whole trophic cascade that happens as a result. So it's a story. It's not the way. It's a way. But I hope it's given you a little bit of food for thought and some inspiration. So thank you for listening. It's now. One people.